Hello everybody, and welcome to this video. I had a lot of questions about using a D&D monster and having act like an actual unique creature that's a living, breathing creature that's utilizing all the rules to make it more interesting. And to help me out on this, I'm here with my internet friend, Nekkowe. But he is a lovely person who has participated in many of my D&D games. Well, I'll just give you an example. So, do you remember the logic puzzle? That was one of the first sessions that we had with the Avatar of Justice.
There were a bunch of logic puzzles, especially in the early ones. I do not quite remember what you mean by the Avatar of Justice.
Yeah, it was basically kind of a murder mystery thing where it was a basic logic puzzle and there was a paradox thing in it, right?
Oh, the three people in the prison cell.
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically, I just ran a game where two people that were like older than me, that were Dungeons and Dragons players, just couldn't solve that problem. It was somehow beyond them, and it was funny because like I believe I tracked it and it took you all of 10 seconds to solve it. So you're certainly good when it comes to stuff like that, and you're also really good when it comes to certain aspects of role playing as well.
I feel like especially that kind of puzzle comes down a lot to prior experience. I don't remember the details of the one you posed us though.
No, it was a very simple logic puzzle at its heart, but as always, I kind of tried to jazz it up a little bit.
Could you restate it, even just for the listeners, or so?
Oh, sure.
Get a better perspective on it again.
Sure. The basics of it is that there were three people. They each had one statement to say. Two of them were liars. One of them was telling the truth, and the players had to figure out which one of them was guilty of the murder. And the gist of it is that there was sort of a secondary clue. If you looked at the body of the person that was killed, you would find out that one of the people always lied. So you could kind of figure it out by that. But I believe you were able to figure out that puzzle without even that clue. You were able
we never actually looked at that.
No, you were able to figure it out just because if you just looked at the three answers, then only one set of answers could be correct within the parameters of what the Avatar of Justice, who was this big ghostly person that popped out, would say.
If I don't recall the lies exactly, but before you restate them, I think the point of it was that while one person always told the truth, one person always lied, and I guess there were no rules for the last one. It was not the goal to figure out who was telling the truth. It was just the goal to figure out which person was guilty. And I think that may have been part of it.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
So with something like this, though, we're talking about using a D&D monster and trying to do something that's not typical with it. So for this example, because a lot of people were kind of caught up recently about talking how the D&D dragons don't do as much, which is kind of ridiculous. They're talking about mechanics. But when you're running a game like this, you can't always go with just strictly mechanics and say the dragon's just going to land and slug it out with the players, because the players are always going to win. So you have to kind of treat big encounters like this more of a... There's two ways to do it. Now, there's the way that I did it with the end boss for the Trevorn campaign, where there was just kind of like multiple stages to it. And then there's the other way that I'm going to discuss today, where the dragon's going to act more like a player character and kind of use everything it can do in terms of the game mechanics to get an advantage.
So when you say making a D&D monster act like a living, breathing thing, do you mean in what context? In combat? In a storytelling capacity?
In both, actually. So what we're going to be talking today is a young red dragon. And if you take a look in the book, it would seem like he only has a limited things he can do. His biggest thing, of course, is he can fly and breathe fire. So the players in this case would be kind of, for any reason, they are heading to this small walled border town. Mm-hmm. And when they get there, they quickly find out that the town is kind of under siege. There's kind of burn marks on all the wall, and there's a couple of guards armed with longbows and arrows. And the PCs will quickly find out that the leader of the town wants to talk to them, and he explains a red dragon has been raiding the town on a regular basis, and he needs help to get rid of it.
Huh.
So that's a bog standard so far.
Yeah, that's like a very classical adventurer setup.
Sure. So at this point, he gives the PCs detailed information where the dragon's lair is. He'll explain it's exactly 6 days' travel through a valley to a hillside where the dragon has taken residence in a large cave. So we'll get back to this little town later. So at this point, I set up 3 different maps because the PCs actually have a ton of options. They can leave and try to get better supplies to take on a dragon, though I would assume many players just wouldn't do that because it seems like that's something that a lot of players don't do anymore. They would rather think, okay, the dragon's here, we can kill the dragon, let's go kill the dragon.
I guess that would depend a lot on what expectations you set prior as a DM, like what kind of world they found themselves in before, and how much they trust into the pacing being tailored to them. Besides,
yes. Now, if they're playing a game like mine, they would kind of know that there's going to be huge variances in that, and there's going to be things that they can directly take on and things that are just out there that might or might not be too powerful for them to attack directly.
Mm-hmm.
So in this case, we'll say that for the first choice, the PCs decide to stay in town. So that's the first map. And map 1 is just going to be the outskirts of a walled town. Now, if the PCs decide to wait for the dragon to attack the town, they'll find out that the dragon instead is going to attack a supply wagon headed into town. Because the dragon's already attacked the town several times, trying to get what they wanted to get. But it was rebuffed every time. So this time instead, he's going to do something different and attack supplies going into the town.
Huh.
So the PCs have another choice, whether they just want to kind of let it happen or just allow the supply wagon to be destroyed or to attack the dragon, or they could try to do a bunch of different stuff at this point.
Mm-hmm.
So, and generally speaking, if the PCs try to attack the dragon will give him a couple hits, but he will quickly just give up the case because the dragon sees that what he's trying to make happen isn't happening, and he doesn't really have any interest in, hurting the PCs. It's not his goal, so the dragon will leave.
Mm-hmm.
So this is where the other 2 maps are. So map 2 is the area where the PCs will be heading through the valley to get to where the dragon's cave is. So in this area, there's a bunch of traps that the dragon will set up. But this dragon obviously is not a green dragon, it's a red dragon. So, but it's a very
difference between those.
Yeah, people who know so that's the thing too. I always forget that with people who don't really know that much about D&D, there's all this kind of shared knowledge. So anybody who's experienced with D&D would assume that a red dragon is going to act like a red dragon usually does, which is basically your prototypical dragon. It's going to use its vast superiority to just destroy an area, take over an area, and basically, lord over a certain little area. That's what red dragons generally do. Now, green dragons are the ones who will use, like, traps and be cunning and whatnot. So this red dragon is going to do everything it can within its abilities to set up some traps. It's not going to be that great at doing that, but so it's going to have a couple basic traps. In particular, there's going to be a small cave that the dragon marked with claw marks and singed some nearby trees. Now, PCs should realize that this is obviously not the large cave that they were directed to and be suspicious. Because they were given exact directions, and they're not 6 days out, they're only 5 days out.
I think that's very fair telegraphing.
Yes. And like I said, this isn't a very good trap. It's just a trap that a red dragon probably would do to try to harass and annoy the PCs. Because if the PCs take the bait and wander inside the cave, then cave bears will attack them. because basically what the dragon did is just kind of hang outside the cave and make a bunch of mess, and then because hoping that the PCs would kind of wonder what's going on with this smaller cave and go in there. But obviously that the PCs might or might not bite on that. If you were in that situation, would you explore the small cave or would you just keep on going onto the bigger cave?
That would depend a lot on what the mood of the party was at that time. Because depending on how into the chase we got, I might just completely not realize that we were like that would not be a cave. Where's the dragon?
Yeah. And that's a case
supposed to
too
be.
where, just to be fair, I would have to make absolutely sure that the player characters know that they're only 5 days away, and if depending on how closely this particular batch of players pays attention to details, I might give them a hint that again they're 6 days away. The dragon's lair is 6 days away, and they're only 5 days away. So, the other little trap that the dragon set in this little area is just a large number of dead trees. And there's a path that goes through the valley, and basically the dragon will have just destroyed a bunch of trees and just set them across the path. So the PCs will have to decide if they're going to cross this or just maybe take some extra time to avoid it. And what the dragon's going to do is when the PCs try to cross the pile of dead trees and whatnot, it's just going to set the entire thing on fire.
Okay.
And the dragon will then harass them afterwards. So basically that means it'll do the classic swoop in from the sky, just blast them with his fire breath, and then fly away as soon as they start doing some damage to it. And at this point, the PCs might or might not note that this dragon is not acting like a typical red dragon, and that might influence their actions in map 3.
I'm not sure that's a thing you can really expect of people at that point.
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
if we're like really heavy D&D veterans who already know exactly the differences between all the palette swaps of dragons,
Yes.
then I guess that could be a thing, but it would depend on player knowledge.
Sure.
And
there's the players would have the opportunity to talk to townsfolk and learn more about what a typical red dragon is. They would have that chance to do so, but you're right, they might just not know. So at this point they might not smell a rat from that.
Can I offer a nitpick there?
Sure.
The townsfolk, how would they know exactly what a red... Like, is it a big city where people study dragons extensively?
Nope. This is a border town, so the knowledge of dragons, because dragons live for so long, is basically like it's passed on through the generations of this is what a dragon is. So because they live in this world where dragons are a reality, they all kind of know a little bit about red dragons because one has been living near them for a number of years.
Okay.
And certainly it would seem, and we'll get to that later. So map 3, Dragon's Lair. It's the classic, just large open cave that's been enlarged by the dragon. And it's a simple setup. It's got a large sleeping area surrounded by small piles of little rocks, and all around the edges of the cave are rubble. And the dragon will leap out of a hidden alcove near the back of the cave and do its best to hit and run the PCs within the confines of the cave. And if the PCs are smart enough, this is where they'll box in the dragon and finally finish it off.
What if they're not?
Then the dragon will either kill a bunch of them, or the PCs will have to retreat.
Okay, but for the dragon, it's definitely a fight to the death there.
Not necessarily. And this is where we're going to go back to it. So, as the dragon's dying, it will reach towards a pile of the small rocks and kind of die groaning something in Draconic. So if the PCs examine the small pile of rocks, they will find out quickly that they're makeshift graves for the small bodies of several young fire dragons. The bodies are decomposed, but it's evident they were killed with several arrows. So now we go back to that first map, where if the PCs kind of do a little bit more scrounging around, they might have come up with some questions about this whole setup and why it was a little bit weird why this town is being attacked. Because it turns out that the entire reason the dragon was attacking this town is because the leader of the town killed these dragon, like, newborns, basically, and was doing it basically to create magical items and potions for himself and his little cadre of magic users. So there's a couple different ways the PCs might figure this out. They could score really high on diplomacy checks, intimidation checks, depending on who they were talking to. They might just kind of logically look and consider there's really only a couple guards with longbows. How did only like a handful of guards with longbows manage to drive off a dragon? And if they ask around and ask the right town folks, they might find out that no, it wasn't actually the guardsman that drove it off. It was the lord in his inner circle of kind of people that he had, which were kind of using magic. And that's what drove off the dragon in the first place.
I'm with you so far.
So it's basically, at this point, then, questioning, when the players first arrive in town, you have to give them that opportunity to figure that out for themselves. So even if they don't know that the red dragon is acting very weird, they might talk to some people outside the town that would note that it's very strange that the dragon's attacking the town, because generally red dragons don't really attack a town unless it's, some sort of like riches are to be had. They're typically greedy. There's not really that much gold in the town. So, in fact, this dragon wasn't looking for riches. It wasn't looking for gold. It was basically just trying to revenge. It was basically trying to get revenge for the death of its young.
Oh, dragons do that?
I would say that this dragon would. Red dragons are intelligent. They can talk. They have an intelligence score of 17, even as a young dragon. So they're pretty much smarter than the vast majority of humans. And a young red dragon like this will start laying eggs and stuff. And it would definitely be an angry enough creature to the point where if somebody just destroys its young, it would pretty much do anything to get revenge on them. But it would also value their life enough to the point where they wouldn't just rush in there on a suicide mission. So that means this could go several different ways. The PCs could team up with the dragon to take revenge against the lord of the town. But then, of course, that would be an issue of ethics if it's going to be okay for that group to make an arrangement with a creature like a red dragon.
And risk the townfolk and so on.
Yes, and that's the other thing, too. It's does anybody else in the area care that this guy's, making a red dragon angry? Very clearly, this guy is supposed to have a responsibility to be a lord of this little border town. But if he finds up he's basically been acting in a very selfish way to put the entire town in danger just so you could have more magical stuff.
Yeah.
So that's kind of just a general notion of just how to have this dragon who, according to the rules, could only really do a certain amount of things to actually make it a little bit more interesting in terms of what it can do. And somebody else also asked me, how do you make a good D&D villain? And it seems to me like the best villains are always ones that they're always trying to do something that's right, but they're always actually pretty much only doing it for their own self-interest.
What exactly is it about the dragon scenario that you'd like my take on?
Well, is there anything that kind of strikes out at you that might be a problem? Obviously, the biggest thing is if the biggest issue of this one is there's really only, if the players don't happen to get any good rolls with diplomacy, they're probably not going to figure out that the lord of the town caused the dragon to attack them. Or they could do something like they could send a rogue in to sneak into the dragon's cavern, and with some good rolls, he might discover what's going on with the dragon's dead young, and then report back to the party. And that's kind of the only two ways that they could kind of figure out that the Lord was actually to blame for this situation and not, the dragon.
If the players miss all cues about the dragon having about the children of the dragon being murdered by the townsperson, if
Yes.
they miss everything tracing any kind of fault back to the town, would you leave it at that and let them move on?
Sure, if they decided not to examine the piles of rocks, and they just somehow didn't do anything, then yes, I would allow that group just to continue on.
If the ambush by the dragon, where he traps them between trees, and if they try to cross the trees, he sets them on fire. If that goes really well and they land a couple of really good shots on the dragon, no matter how well that fight goes, would he still keep going back to his cave? Basically,
if they figured out a way to get the dragon down and keep the dragon down long. Oh, by the way, I didn't even mention this at the top. This the CR calculations for this would basically mean that we had 4 PCs around level 7, which means if they somehow managed to get the red dragon to a point where it couldn't move, they would be able to just slug it out and finish it off. Yes.
Okay. See,
but the mobility of a dragon, and even at this level, the players wouldn't have that many abilities that would be able to keep it down. Because even a young red dragon would just be very difficult for the players to limit its mobility in terms of getting away from them if it was too hurt.
See, I'm not entirely sure what to comment on in this specific instance if we're talking about living, breathing NPCs. Mostly because a dragon is a lot... I'm not sure if it's harder or easier to make it seem like a living, thinking being. Right now, the quest path you've laid out seems both, despite all the options where players can get information in different ways, it seems very rigid and gamified. One thing I was going to comment on when you first mentioned it was that the first time the players encounter the dragon at the supply cart, after it has a hard time with the fight, it flees. And I was about to say, that seems like a pretty neat thing, and a thing that most games... if we're talking, for example...
Yeah, that seems video gamey. See, I might have misspoke.
No, it seems the opposite of video gamey, is what I'm trying to say.
Oh, it does. Oh, no, because the first time the dragon slugs it out at the wagon, he's not going to fight the players full on. As soon as the dragon's trying to lure the Lord or one of his magic users out of the town.
Oh.
So as soon as he sees that the PCs are coming and not the Lord, he'll maybe throw off a couple warning shots, but the dragon will leave before the PCs can get into a scenario where they're actually going to kind of...
See, I don't have a lot of DM experience or experience designing a campaign or a curse of events like that. I was about to say it's the opposite of video gamey that the dragon runs away when it's hurt, because a lot of video games tend to ignore that aspect of enemy design completely, where they just make every enemy fight to their death, be it out of desperation, be it just because.
Yeah, and I would figure in things too, because during the dead tree encounter, where the dragon would flee if the players got to him. I forgot to mention too, with the area with the dead trees, that would be difficult terrain for most players unless they had abilities to avoid that. So the dragon, in addition to that, I would say that I would take into account if one of the players was some sort of exotic thing and the dragon might have never encountered like a monk, or the dragon might have never encountered a warlock. So if the dragon encounters something like that, it's like, wow, I just got hit like really hard by this thing, and I've never seen this before. That might be an indication that the dragon's like, well, I'm gonna have to rethink this and maybe plan differently for the next attack. So it's not just a matter of the dragon getting knocked down to a certain number of hit points and then fleeing. In this case, I would try to have the dragon kind of focus on its goals. So that can go the other way too, because if the players have a bard or somebody who's good at just annoying or just using the dragons, because red dragons, their big weakness is actually they can get angry really easily.
You mean they get like tunnel vision, essentially?
Yeah, basically. If you have a bard who's happens to speak Draconic or can, magically make fun of the dragon, or mock the dragon or something, then that would be an advantage. That would be an advantage, because then the dragon would try to just kill this one thing and might, lose track of the fact that the other people are kind of forming up and getting advantage on it. So
I think it's a good thing to keep the dragon's goals in mind before the set path, I would argue. For instance, would you make the dragon just turn tail and run during the final encounter where it's in its cave if the fight isn't going well for it? Or would you just leave it be there and fight to the death because set piece?
So, dragons can speak common.
Mm-hmm.
So, but they don't like to. Generally speaking, dragons consider it beneath them to even converse in common. However, if the fight's going really badly, the dragon might do something like say, whatever the Lord is paying you, I will pay you more. He'll try to... The red dragon's probably going to assume that these are mercenaries, and he'll basically make an offer to the players to say, if you bring me the Lord, we don't have to have this battle. Like, I'll pay you more than he's offering. I'll pay you more to kill him than he's offering you to kill me. Now, that might or might not work, but that would probably be one of the approaches the dragon would take. And if that doesn't work, then maybe the dragon would escape, and that's one of the cases, too, where if the players hurt the dragon enough, but he's got the ability to escape, then the dragon would escape, and he would travel back to the town, and basically then it would be the players following behind him, whether or not they had any magical ability to keep up with him, or they were just kind of following behind him. And then the dragon would eventually get... I keep on calling the dragon a he, by the way. It's obviously a female dragon, which the PCs would know that if they were versed in nature. But the dragon would go back to the town and then eventually just probably die fighting the Lord and his minions. And then the players would see that the Lord of the town was like a really powerful magic user, and he had this circle of other magic users too. So they would see that happening, and that might raise some questions, or it might not. That's the thing.
Why didn't this guy just take care of the dragon in the first place if he had the ability to?
Yes.
And why did that person not take care of the dragon in the first place if they had the ability to?
Basically, he is a coward. The Lord wanted all these artifacts and potions and stuff that you can make using the different body parts of dragons. Mm-hmm. But he just was too much of a coward to try to kill a dragon on his own. He set up a really kind of distraction for the dragon. Then his men went in and basically killed all the young dragons and took like their body parts, so the Lord could brew up his stuff.
But when the dragon comes to town, he doesn't run, he fights them.
See, yeah, at that point, the dragon is beat up enough from the PCs that even the coward would realize, oh, I got a good chance at killing this guy.
Oh, okay.
And then he'll grow a spine. Once the dragon is sort of beat up, then he'll grow a spine and try to kill it. And there's a bunch of other little ways too. Like the Lord of the town, when he's talking to the PCs, will always be fingering this kind of golden medallion with like a glass thing in the center of it. And if somebody's a really good magic user, well, if somebody's a very powerful magic user and they get a good roll, they could tell that that's kind of an amulet that is specifically made from a dragon's eye.
Which character do you want? See, we were talking about video gamey setups, and
Yes.
I really do think that this seems very rigid. I thought, like, at first when you first mentioned that the dragon turns tail and runs when the fight isn't
Yes.
going well for it, that was a break from that kind of convention. But given that she does that to move on to the next set piece, I'm not sure I would call this a living, breathing scenario, or a scenario with living, breathing entities.
Yeah.
Would you say?
See, this is the thing. It's so red dragons are pretty much solitary when they're not like mating and stuff. So this is a young red dragon. It doesn't have any like minions or anything because it's too young to set that up yet. So it's basically on its own. So, depending on what happened, it's probably going to move to the safety of its cave where it can kind of do one last ambush and try to get advantage on these guys that are attacking it.
When that doesn't go well, you said the dragon would escape and move back to the town.
Yes.
Where
At
would
that point, the dragon would be so hurt and frustrated that it would just go all in and say, "All right, well that's it. It would get so angry. It's like I'm just gonna have to try to kill this guy." At this point, like it's anger at like not being able to kill this lord will kind of overpower its ability to reason out that this might not be a winning strategy.
I'm sorry, I'm not sure what to really comment on there.
Yeah, no, it's not. I mean, now that I think about it, unfortunately, it is video gamey. I kind of turned it from World of Warcraft to basically an old
Deus
school
Ex.
D&D arcade. Yeah. So this is not World of Warcraft, but this is basically kind of like, you're right, it's like Deus Ex. Like that's what this is. So in this scenario, obviously, now this is one that I have not it's just but yeah, I think you bring up some good points in terms of...
See, I don't think that's a negative thing in principle. It can definitely be a negative thing when it feels like you're just being dragged along that one path. And
Certainly.
considering you're being dragged along a very literal 6-day long path,
Yeah.
I feel like this is very at risk of that.
Yes. So obviously, you can add more stuff in here. I thought there was a chance that maybe, I don't know, there was some some sort of monsters that the PCs might be able to recruit to help take on the dragon. But you're right, because like this is kind of like the dragon's here, it's gonna go here, here, and here. And I'm kind of planning ahead with these maps of where the dragon's gonna go and what the dragon might do. But I think that really is just kind of gonna build on stuff. Because, I mean, technically the dragon could go anywhere and do anything. But in this case, the dragon's just so fixated on attacking this one lord and killing him that it doesn't really want to move too far away from that. And the only safe place it has is that one little area there. But more importantly, I'm not adding... to do all this stuff, I'm not adding things. See, what a lot of people are doing is they're adding, like, 4th edition mechanics. So, basically, the dragon would be in one area, and it would kind of do these World of Warcraft mechanics to, like, make the battle longer. And that...
How so?
Basically 4th edition stuff, it was basically like World of Warcraft. So the dragon would get to half hit points, and something spectacular would happen.
Okay,
because
so it's just like a second boss form, or a second phase.
Basically. And it would have stuff like minions, which are creatures with like... And I'm using that term in the 4th edition term, where it's creatures that can hit like a normal creature, but they only have 1 hit point. So basically, player characters can like wipe out like a bunch of like little minion guys and seem super powerful. Now, there's a lot of creatures that would normally serve a red dragon like this that might. I mean, it's a young red dragon, so it probably doesn't have minions or anything like that. But, yeah. And this doesn't even take into account the players' backgrounds. Because if somebody was, like, for example, somebody who had a lot of training in, like, making potions and stuff like that, they might have heard of this town. And that the person who leads this town was getting a ton of like supplies in for like the manufacturing of magical items, or maybe somebody's part of the Zentarum, the Black Network, and they know that something's going on with this guy, or maybe somebody's just well versed in their background and they know a lot about dragons and they can kind of figure out that this dragon's not really acting like the prototypical red dragon.
How come it's not acting like the prototypical red dragon?
Because generally speaking, a red dragon will have its own little territory, depending on the size of the dragon.
Oh, no. I understand that it's not acting like the way that it's not acting like a typical red dragon. I'm mostly asking for like the cause of why it's not. Because that didn't really seem like it was clear from the scenario as you put it up till now.
Yeah, no. Unless the PCs like kind of figured it out on their own, either figure it out by like killing the dragon, then looking at the piles of stone. The reason the red dragon is doing this because it was a young red dragon without much of like a hoard of wealth. So the only wealth that it really had was its kind of first batch of kids. So really the red dragon usually would kind of focus on their money and stuff, but in this case this young red dragon was a little bit focused and obsessed with her children.
She put her family before a career.
Yeah, which sometimes happens. All dragons kind of like dote over their children for a while before they kick them out of the nest when they get too big. So in this case, it was the usual red dragon's greed. Because the usual red dragon, like, if you go to a red dragon's... This is the classic scenario from, like, Lord of the Rings. If you go to a red dragon's nest, and they have a huge pile of gold, and you go in there and you take one goblet, and you take that home, the dragon will then follow you home and destroy your entire village... and kill everybody in the place and get its one little goblet back, so it can put it back on its treasure pile.
Okay,
that's generally how red dragons operate.
Gosh.
But yeah, so this young red dragon kind of that obsession over wealth, because it didn't really have that much of a hoard of gold or anything yet. It kind of put that obsession into its young children.
But didn't you mention that it also employed a lot of other things that usually are exclusive to other kinds of dragons?
Like yes. It kind of knows that it probably might not be powerful enough to take on these adventurers. So, but it still wants to stay in the area because it wants to kill this lord. So the red dragon will kind of stoop to methods that normally red dragons never stoop to, i.e. like trying to use misdirection and traps, even though they'll do it really badly and simply because it's a red dragon.
But if essentially it's acting like a green dragon, what's preventing you from just making it a green dragon?
By having it do something that's atypical for the dragon type, then the players might smell a rat. But that's considering the background of the players if they know a ton about the shared universe of D&D.
But I mean, even a green dragon would need some kind of justification to do all this anyway, right? It just feels like it throws up a bunch of inconsistencies for not really that much of a gain, storytelling-wise.
Sure.
I'm not sure.
That's the thing, though. If it was a green dragon doing this, the traps would be much more effective and much more like diabolical.
Oh, okay.
So if we did it like that, then the level 4 PCs would be facing this red dragon, and all of a sudden they would probably die. Because if they were facing traps that were more effective, then the green dragon would, it would have to act like a green dragon and like hit them while they're at their lowest, and it would probably kill them. And green dragons are kind of like... I think a green dragon who would lose its young might just say, too bad. I'll just have another batch of eggs.
So a green dragon would be smart and leave if the fight at the last cave wasn't going well, instead of turning towards the town and dying harder.
Yeah, a green dragon wouldn't get angry. A green dragon, in this case, might just, like, wait till the Lord was, like, in his old age, and then he'd just attack all of a sudden and just kill his entire family.
Okay. I'm sorry, I think I've dragged this a bit off track.
Oh, no, it's no
the
problem.
living, breathing NPC thing.
Yeah, no, this is, well, it's just kind of like an example of how you can use just a basic creature and try to, and just, incorporate different things to sort of make it more of an interesting encounter than you enter the red dragon's cave, it lands on the ground, it breathes fire, it runs up and tries to hit you.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, so this is a little bit more complex than that, and I was just trying to come up with ideas. And somebody also asked me the question of how to come up with a good D&D evil adversary, and I think a situation like this is good too, because the Lord obviously is one of those guys who's willing to endanger his entire town just for his own benefit.
I feel like these tie into each other too. For instance, it could have gone, like, if we were talking about video gamey setups and thinking those, like, if we're assuming that those are bad, which we're not always, definitely, but I think that the Red Dragon thing, basically the designing scenarios is always going to create less interesting setups than designing motivations or circumstances.
Certainly. And the same thing here, because I'm putting so much effort into designing, like, the 3-map thing, just having just a general area in mind and then just letting things happen naturally. I think that's a good point. Mm-hmm. Because I think, I run my games in 2 ways. It's either really kind of strict dungeons that I run for new players or conventions, or more of like the open world type thing, where things are just kind of happening, and the players find themselves in that world.
Would you say it's a good... How many of your notes as a DM do you just throw away at some point because the players took a path you didn't even anticipate?
Oh, a lot. A great deal. There's just... I write a backstory for, like, every character. And then, generally speaking, I might or might not use it. So that's what's, sometimes you get to use a character to their full effect, and other times not. Lord Baldovan, basically, he's never actually... Nobody ever sides with him. He's a character in my Trevorn campaign. And he's a guy who's got a very interesting backstory, but nobody's ever had any interest in him. In the character of Grendo, originally was just a guy who owned a pawn shop, and that was it. Like, there wasn't any character to that, and he kind of got built up by how different sets of players that I had went through that campaign, and Grendo kind of got built up. And then, I still don't... And the Scraps, the dog character, who ended up being Grendo's dog... he was a guy who originally was just the rat hunting dog from the Warhammer Fantasy game. Mm-hmm. But yeah, no, you're completely right. Having motivations rather than trying to craft a scenario where the players go in it and it's kind of it's trying to de-game things is good.
I feel
See,
like
I went into this trying to avoid the simple gamification, but I think you're right. I might have actually gone too far the other way, and trying to make this less like a video game type thing, I've actually might have gone too far to the point where I'm actually making it more like a video game thing instead of just focusing on motivations.
It is, especially the chase portion does seem like a very strong series of very rigid set piece events, and that is like the quintessential modern video game single player linear campaign thing that I think it could have been a lot worse. It seems like a very easy road a very easy pitfall for DMs to fall into, to just pre-craft scenarios and either how you want them to go or how you want players to end up in a situation.
Sure. Now, here's the thing. here's the other thing too. Like the players don't have to go after the dragon. They could encounter the dragon at the wagon thing, and then the players could just decide, oh, we're just going to sit in town and wait for this damn dragon to come back, and we're just going to keep on attacking it from the safety of the town's walls. They could do that too. There's nothing like forcing the players to try to follow the dragon back to its cave, other than the fact that they were told by the leader of the town that he knows where the dragon's lair is. At that point, it is somewhat up to... But I think you're completely right. If once players get that set of information, I think the vast majority of players will say, okay, we'll go to the dragon's cave. And then it becomes just a series of set things that kind of happen.
The more you try to rigidly piece a situation together that people are going to find themselves in, the more you just create a line of points where things can go wrong. And where players can try to take a completely different route that you didn't plan for in your meticulously crafted scenario. And the more you try to go against that, the worse it's going to feel for the players. So, and like at that point, you just have this track that you want players to go down. And if they deviate from it, it's going to feel like all the design work further down the track that the players are not going to get to experience now is going to be wasted. It's just, that's why it's probably a lot better to just come up with a setting than a set of scenarios.
And the players too could like avoid a lot of this stuff just by trying a different tact. Like if they wanted to try to use different ways to get through the wilderness to avoid all this nonsense with the valley, or if they could, use stealth so the dragon never even knew they were in the valley. But that, again, that would be like, would the players know to do that? And you're still kind of forcing them through this little primrose path here. But and again, too, there's not really that many... It's tough to leave clues that there's something fishy with the Lord without the players kind of feeling... That's the biggest thing I was considering, that with this scenario, the players might feel that they might feel that they weren't given enough hints that there was something going on with the Lord. And they would say, well, no, if this would have happened, then I would have done this, and thus discovered that there was something going wrong with this situation. So that's something you don't want to ever do, too, because then the players will feel like it doesn't matter what they do, you're just always going to go through this certain thing. So, yes.
See, in terms of monster behavior, I would definitely say that something like someone fleeing on low health is already something that can give a great impact about how players perceive it. Because it's not just gonna be a thing with a health bar that runs at you until it dies. It's gonna be a thing that has a basic instinct of self-preservation. Who would have thought? It's just thought like this. It's actually considering things as living beings with their own motivations. I think that is how you get your monsters to feel like living things with their own motivations. Just think of them as that yourself. What would they do in that situation?
So, I hope this talk was informative and somewhat entertaining to all you out there. I want to thank Nekkowe for helping me out with this thing. Do you have anything you want to plug, Nekkowe?
No.
Excellent. Well, as always, have a nice day, and thank you for watching the video. Watching the video. Watching the video. Watching the video.